All right, this is the last section of this week's chapter, which is about adding and subtracting decimals. And this chapter ends with getting specific about rounding decimals off to the tenths, the hundredths, the thousandths place. So the last few exercises specifically deal with this. So, rounding decimals. We first learned about rounding numbers in chapter 9 of the textbook. So, if you feel like you need a review of what it means to round off numbers, please refer back. I'm not going to cover all the intricacies of rounding numbers because we've done this before. So, if you need a review, you want to go back to chapter 3 and get a review. You can also come review with me in office hours if you feel like you need some more support. Essentially, when we round off in decimals, we are going to round off in the same way that we did before. So let's look at an example. Let's say that I ask you to round 1.38 to the nearest tenth. Well, you know that the tenth, right, is the number that is just to the right. It's one place value over to the right from the decimal. That is the tenth place. So that's essentially where we should end. We should round that number and then we should have nothing after it. Okay, so we can have the whole number, we can have our decimal point, and then we should not go beyond the tenths. So to start with, 1.38. Well, I know from chapter 3 that if I'm rounding to the nearest tens place, right, I would round 38 up because it's closest to 40. So my 1.38 becomes 1.40. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove that 0 that is in the hundredths place so that all I have is 1.4. And 1.4 is the answer to rounding 1.38 to the nearest tenth. I want you to go ahead and try now. Here are a couple of numbers that are actually from your textbook, and I want you to use what you recall about rounding numbers to round each of these numbers to the nearest tenth. So remember, 6 point something. We've got to get rid of the numbers that are in the hundredths and the thousandths column, and we've got to have an accurate representation there in the tenths column. So take a minute, pause the video, work these problems, and come back to see your answer. Okay, I'm glad that you're back. Let's take a look at our answer to these problems. So what you should have is that we rounded to 6.7, 4.8, and 4.0. Now that last one may have been a little bit tricky. Let's look back at this for a minute. Well, we know that 96, right, if we rounded it up, what we would get is 1.00. And 1.0 plus 3.00 would be 4, right? So that number, this 6 rounds up so that this is 100. And when we have 100, it moves over, so 4.0. All right, let's try this, but now let's round the numbers here to the nearest hundredths place, right? So we're going to be rounding to the second column to the right of the decimal, the hundredths place. So take a minute, pause the video, work these problems based on what you remember about rounding, and then come back to see the answers. So pause now. Okay, I'm glad you're back. Let's see if you got the same answers that I got. So 6.69, 4.77, 3.96. All right, now 3.96 did not become 4.00 this time. Why is that? Let's look back for a minute. Well, 3.960, right? If I take the 0 off here, it doesn't round this to 97. It's just a 0, so I take it off and that number stays the same, 3.96. All right, let's do this again, but let's do it to the thousandths place. So you're rounding this time to the thousandths place. What will you do? What will happen? Take a minute, pause the video, and then come back to see the next slide. Okay, I'm glad you're back. Let's go to the next slide. 4.399, 32.512, 29.674. Did you get the same answers that I did? And if not, come to an office hour and let's talk about why. So let's talk about what you're going to do from here. The last three exercises, exercise 10 and 11, or the last two exercises on pages 160 and 161, have to do with these exercises, or excuse me, this rounding of decimals to the tenths, hundredths, and thousandths place. So take some time now and complete those exercises. And then when you're done, review all of the chapter content again, come to office hours for any questions, rewatch all these videos, and when you're feeling ready, then you're going to go on and complete the review of chapter 11 on page 162 of the textbook. And then you're done with chapter 11. We're going to have a quiz next week, and it's going to cover addition, subtraction, and then also multiplication and division. So chapter 12, it'll cover chapters 11 and 12 next week, after we work on multiplication and division of decimals. If you have questions, please reach out. I really hope these help. Thanks so much.